Turning to the history of your country, what happened under the Maduro and Chavez reigns?
They destroyed and ruined one of the most prosperous companies in the world that supports an oil-producing country. That's why the production of assets supported by the United States is very important, because pillaging cannot continue. We need to protect the industry to make it prosperous again.
Juan Guaido, leader of the Venezuelan opposition, speaking yesterday to our own Trish Regan. The day before, he spoke to President Trump about Venezuela's future, and Trish Regan joins us now with more. Trish, great interview. Thank you very much for coming. Congratulations on getting it before the president did. Now, clearly, Venezuela has been destroyed by this klepto-socialist regime that's been in power for so long. How can this young man upset that regime?
Well, he's certainly trying, and he's got the people on his side, and that means a lot. It really does. I mean, you think about the protests in the streets just last week when he swore himself in as president per their constitution, because they're saying that the last election was completely illegitimate and that Maduro stole it. So he's now saying, I'm the president, and you saw people come out by the hundreds of thousands throughout the streets of Caracas and all over Venezuela there to support democracy, to support freedom. You know, they've had nearly 20 years of socialist rule, and it hasn't worked. It really hasn't. It has gotten so corrupted. It is a kleptocracy, as you say, where the government steals from the people, and the people have no opportunity. They have no hope, and they're finally saying we need to take our country back. And I got to tell you, it's a little bit uplifting, right? You know, with everything going on in the world, and you know, all the squabbling in Washington, you look at how people are marching there in the streets and risking their lives, as this young man is. He has a wife, he has a little girl at home, and he is risking his life. A couple times he tried to call into my show, but he was in hiding, and it didn't work. We're thankful that he was able to call in and do that interview just last night. It was an important interview. It was important that the American people hear from him, and he had quite a bit to say. I hope he succeeds. I'm going to say it, because I think it's the Russians, the Iranians, the Cubans, Hezbollah on the side, basically, of Maduro versus freedom.
I think Trish brings up a great point, too. I mean, it's so easy in this whole discussion to get wrapped up into, especially me, into the larger geopolitical context of what's going on between the U.S. and Russia and China. Why are these people protesting? Because they're starving. Because they can't give their little babies food. They can't feed their children. I mean, this is pure desperation from this regime. And I have been hammering this for the past few days, and I don't think our European friends are going to be happy with me for this, but I think their actions, their slowness to recognize not an opposition leader, not someone who's claimed the presidency, but according to the Venezuelan Constitution and to the National Assembly, the duly and rightfully interim president of Venezuela. For the Europeans not to recognize that and to ask Maduro to make more concessions only gives Maduro more time. Time is on his side, and they are allowing this misery to fester, and we need the Europeans to stand up. If you're going to be against the Russians and against the Chinese and against tyranny, stop getting just irritated with Trump and stand up for the right thing.
Hey,
Sorry
Trish,
for the rant.
hey, Trish, Jack Howe, I enjoyed the interview, and thank you. Have we reached the tipping point where a change in government in Venezuela is no longer possible, but now likely? I mean, is there what kind of a path forward is there for Maduro at this point? When I look at that map of which companies support the opposition or the interim president, as the White House calls them, it seems just overwhelming right now.
Yeah, you know, I'm glad you brought it up, Jack. I will tell you that on December 14th, okay, this is like, what, 6 weeks ago now, I led my program, Trish Regan Primetime, with the news that the Maduro regime would be no longer. And I knew this in part because you have only to look at the bond market, okay? If you look at PDVSA bonds, a little bit different the last couple of days, but the sovereign debt bonds, what you could see there is increasingly people were pricing in a regime change. And they were pricing in a regime change. Why? Because on January 10th, they anticipated Maduro would say, okay, I got another 6 years. Well, guess what? The free world was about to say, no, you don't have another 6 years because you stole the election. So that was going to bring it to a head. And in the meantime, you had these freedom fighters in the background working the situation there on the ground. They know how desperate the people are. And, you know, let me also point out, a lot of these people, you know, Juan Guaido, 35 years old. So many of them that I've had on my program, very young guys. It's this sort of new generation, and they've grown up with this despair, and they've said, you know, I don't want this for my family, and we need to change it.
I'll ask this, you know, it's a difficult question because this is not a matter of flipping a switch. I know, Morgan, you have some insight on this as well. Can this be done peacefully? Can there be a peaceful transition with all of the parties involved and all of the danger here?
Yes, I'm going to actually say that, yes. And if Nicolas Maduro is listening right now, this is some important advice. Listen, John Bolton was on the program the other night, and he said it doesn't have to end badly. In other words, he can take his little payout. I mean, there are some reports that he's trying to load up the Russian planes with gold and take it out. But he could take a little money and go get amnesty in another country and live happily ever after on the beach in his villa. I think those were John's words.
Sounds like Cuba.
So look, I mean, it could be done, but why is it that time and time again, and you know this well with your background in Latin America, David, why is it that they hang on so desperately too long? Really and truly, because if he doesn't actually act here, if he doesn't, and I would say this afternoon we got word that he's trying to potentially negotiate with the opposition leaders. We'll see what that means. I did speak with some opposition leaders who said, look, you know, there's 3 mandatory things. 1, we need new elections. 2, we need a new electoral board. And 3, we need our votes to be secret. Okay, because right now they're not secret. So if you don't vote for the party that Maduro wants you to vote for, then guess what? You lose your benefits. You could lose your apartment. You lose your rations. You lose your food. You lose the ability to take care of their family. So they have a lot of work to do.
You know, there is a model for what you just described, and that model is Cuba. The Cubans, as we know, have been providing all sorts of support, logistical support. They get oil. The Cubans get oil from Venezuela, and then they load Venezuela up with all these security people. The communists have been in control of Cuba for 60 years. As much as we've tried to dislodge the communists, we have failed to do so. Some people are saying, geez, if the communists can last 60 years in Cuba, despite all of our opposition, maybe these guys can hang on, to which you would say what?
I'd say absolutely not. And I think, you know, that ship has sailed. You see it in the eyes of the people right now. You really do. You can feel it. People marching in the streets. There were many more protests today. I actually just got some of the video from some people that were there in the protests. And they want that change. You'll see it tonight. The other thing is, I mean, think about a world where if you dare to think differently, if you dare to cause a commotion because you think differently, you can wind up in jail. And I've spoken to many people that have wound up in jail just like that. And, you know, what kind of way is that to live? I know you say, well, it's sort of, and it hasn't worked in Cuba. I mean, they're still in power, but I don't know as they can ever pull that off.
The one thing in favor of a regime change is the fact that there are so many people that have been willing to come out. Some people wonder if the army, God forbid, turns their guns on the protesters, what happens then?
Well, let's hope that doesn't happen. I mean, I think John Bolton had scribbled on his notepad the other day, 5,000 troops to Colombia. You know, nobody wants to see anyone lose their life over this. But the reality is this is a strategically important place. The oil, which is the obvious, right? I mean, they have tremendous natural reserves. Why should a country with all that wealth there in the ground be so poor? So you've got the oil, which is a reality, and you've got the people, which is so significant. We don't like to see people starving like they've been starving. And then the third big thing is, do you really want the Russians there? Right? I mean, not since 1962 have we had an enemy parked right there with the ability to do something to us. I don't think we want that.
Well,
it's a challenge militarily because we have about estimated about 25,000 Cuban troops, you know, on the ground. We have Russian intelligence, of course, all over the place. A number of reports, and you know, Venezuela is, I think, double the size of Iraq, and not only in size but also in population. And I don't think anyone's calling for any sort of full-scale invasion. But I think the president deserves a lot of credit, and so do you, Trish, for covering this since December. You're the one person in all of news, by the way, that's been covering this.
I'm like,
you are. are. You
I
really
think it's
are.
a pretty important
You are.
story. And by the way, with everything going on here, everybody's talking about socialism and how grand that could be. Go ahead,
Hey, Trish,
Jack.
it's Scott Martin in Chicago.
Oh, Scott, hey.
Hey, Trish, do you think with regards to getting Maduro out of there, we get back to this more 80s economic expansion, 80s growth rates that Venezuela once had?
Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be terrific? I mean, you've certainly got some people there that would very much like to open up the markets. They know that you need a little injection of capitalism in there. I mean, even, you know, with the socialism stuff, and I think that they still want a safety net for the people, you got to have some capitalism.
Well, and he
so it
spoke
could
to
be-
that eloquently on your program last night about how he would get the engineers back in the oil company to get it producing. Tonight, by the way, I want to preview the show you have coming on tonight. Very special guest.
Yes. So there are 5 Americans that have been held hostage for over a year now in Venezuela. They were duped into going there. They were Citgo employees from Texas and Louisiana. They went down there because they were told they had to be at a conference. And what do you know? They got there. They were taken by Maduro. They were thrown in jail. And he hasn't let them out. And their families have been terrified. I mean, really terrified, paralyzed almost, because they were afraid to come forward for fear that Maduro would do something worse to their loved ones. Well, 2 of the daughters of one of the prisoners have made a decision. They want to speak out. So they will be joining me exclusively at the top of the hour to tell me and all of us about their dad and how horrific a year it has been as they pray for his return. Again, 5 Americans being held hostage by Nicolas Maduro. We should care.
8 p.m. Eastern on FBN right here tonight. Congratulations on all this work. Terrific work. Thank you very much, Trish. Well, Democrats who once entertained Social Security cuts are now pushing legislation that expands the program, and they have unprecedented support. But who is on the hook to foot the bill? We'll debate that coming next. Breaking news. Here's another look at shares of Facebook. Look at this. It's now up almost 12% after hours. The social media giant beating Wall Street's fourth quarter expectations, despite all of the recent scandals. Facebook reporting average daily and monthly user growth of about 9%. The company also posting record profits in the quarter, beating its previous record by nearly $1 billion. Unbelievable. Meanwhile, House Democrats introducing legislation that would expand Social Security benefits across the board and prolong the program for the rest of the century. The bill that finances a more generous benefit and cost of living adjustment formula already has the support of more than 200 House Democrats. That's just shy of the 218 vote mark it needs. But who is going to pay for this? What do you think, gang?
Well, look, you know, we're worried about bond markets and deficits and everything. I'll say this. Bond market is not really reflecting a lot of fear of this. And let's not forget that the Congressional Budget Office came out on Monday and said that the deficit for this year is actually $75 billion less than they thought it was going to be in spring of 2018. That said, let's see some numbers on this plan. We need to know that. And while I'm at it, I'll talk about Kamala Harris talking about single-payer health care. What is that going to cost us? We can't assess this until we really know what it is.
Well, Mike, I think the reason the bond market's not freaked out, to use a word, is because we've always got the lender of last resort, which is the taxpayer that never goes broke. The taxpayer is always there to foot the bill, which is what's going to happen here, which argues again as to why we should privatize this. Look at the countries around the world besides us that have done this already. They're happy with it. If this is an argument for privatization as far as personal accounts, I don't know what is.
I don't think it's going to happen. It's a terrible idea anyhow. I know it would be popular, but look, we're not paying for the program we have. It's underfunded. That's right. Baby steps, right? Let's pay for the thing that we're already doing. Then let's do something about our gaping budget deficit before we talk about expanding benefits.
Well, and that's exactly right. And the Republicans have lost all sort of moral high ground on being the party of fiscal responsibility here, given the massive increases in the deficit, in the debt under their watch. So, you know, one thing I will give the Democrats credit for, even though I totally fundamentally fundamentally disagree with it, is they are coming to the table with a plan, and Americans see a party with a plan, and Republicans need to get on board to finding a plan that addresses the concerns of Americans that feel left behind.
But you know, the thing that's awful about Social Security is it's a fraud. It's a complete fraud. The returns that you get on it's a total Ponzi scheme. The returns that you get, though, on it are less than if you bought a Treasury bill. I mean, by about half. So, I mean, just give us some kind of power over our Social Security funds. They're supposed to be ours. It's supposed to be in a lockbox, and let us deal with it, at least part of it, in terms of investing. Otherwise, the government's just stealing our money.
I agree, David, and people would care more about it, too, because you talk to anybody in my age range, I'm not going to give you my birth date, but a lot of people think Social Security is a scam. They think the money's gone. They think they're not going to get it. They don't care about it. They don't want to pay into it. You give people personal accounts with personal choice. I sound like Steve Forbes here. That's going to solve the problem.
Well, you got another 50 years before you have to worry about it, Scott, so don't worry
70.
about it. All right. Thank you very much, gang. Well, Democrats making another push for wage equality today, all while Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is making a suggestion of her own. We'll show you that coming next. House Democrats pushing for equal pay for equal work today with the reintroduction of the Paycheck Fairness Act. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeting this: if the wage gap is a myth, as some allege, then workplaces should have no problem with workers disclosing our salaries with one another. So, gang, what could possibly go wrong with that?
Well, David, it's going to make the coffee maker conversations much more interesting going forward if that passes through. I'll tell you that much. Look, there's got to be something left in privacy here, I think, if Facebook and Google haven't stolen it all. And you got to remember, too, this is an era when we talk about coming together, when we talk about working together and teaming up at work. This is going to breed a lot of resentment, in my opinion, a lot of jealousy, and divide the workplace.
I think Scott couldn't say it better. I mean, and there's so much sort of government intrusion that this new Democrat Congress is proposing at every level. And listen, you know, as the woman on the panel, let me say I'm very much in favor of equal pay for equal work. But there are ways to get there and hold the private sector accountable without disclosing the personal information. I mean, we're so worried about our personal information being disclosed. The last thing I'd want is everyone knowing my salary.
I'm telling myself here that perhaps there's a method to Representative Ocasio-Cortez's madness here.
No.
Maybe she's trying to compel. Well, I'm going to give her benefit of the doubt. Maybe she's trying to compel enforcement here. Wage equality is something near and dear to my heart, too. I think it's important. I think there are issues in this country with it. Let's see if this pushes everyone in the right direction. Maybe this is a little oblique turn here.
Hey, David, I'm in the running at Barron's for a promotion to senior word donkey. I don't want people knowing how much I make. That's a prestigious position. I still heart AOC, though.
Yeah, I see.
Oh,
Yeah.
my God.
Again, she's got that charisma. She's got that going for her. And the Democrats love her. They're putting her on all of these very important committees. So she might have an impact. Scott, she may be able to actually put this legislation into work.
David, that would be frightening. And I'm also jealous of Jack now, too, because I've heard senior word donkeys are paid like the most at Barron's.
But we won't know until this legislation passes. It's his